Hello EDU 304 and welcome back to day 3 of rubric construction, design, and I guess today usage, because we are actually going to be interacting with a couple of different types of rubrics. And I'm going to show a little bit of love to the fine arts. And we are going to be taking a look at some landscape artwork. And as we do so, I'm going to ask that you download from the right-hand side of Module 2 the rubric and reflection note sheet. And it should look something like this. And I'm providing you with a holistic rubric right here, an analytic rubric right here, a single point rubric here, and then a reflection question and an opportunity, a space for you to write in. What I'm also giving you are some little bubbles that you can manipulate, and you can drag and you can expand however you need to in order to actually assess this work. So this is one of those assignments that I would have printed off for you and had to use pen and paper were we in a face-to-face environment. So I'm doing the best I can to try to make it a digital friendly sort of assignment. The only rubric that's not going to work so well with would be the single point. If you need to give us some feedback concerning a criteria that might need improvement or a criteria that might be above proficiency. But what you could do is you could just go ahead and put your cursor here and provide some feedback down below, typed up like that. What's important for you as we engage in this is that you complete this activity, save it, and then go ahead and upload it to my USF in order to receive credit for today, Monday, March 30th. Before we move into actually taking a look at some of this artwork, I did want to make a note of some of the language used in this rubric, or these rubrics, I guess I should say. I am critical about some of this. One of the things that I'm critical about is, we'll take this one, this analytic one, for example. If we're talking about atmospheric, let's talk about this foreground, middle ground, and background. Here, really, as we look at the different performance descriptors, they should clearly articulate a difference in understanding among the 4, the 3, the 2, and the 1 level student. However, all of the language is the same with the exception of one word, which is understanding, developing, proficient, and exceptional. Now, if the goal of an analytic rubric is to provide clarity for students, I don't necessarily know that developing, proficient, and exceptional is providing enough clarity for them to realistically understand the various levels of performance. That being said, we're going to go ahead and move on with them because not every rubric that you encounter is going to be perfect, but that is just one area that I would draw your attention to as we move through this today. So go ahead and pull that up as we continue with the lesson. I thought before we really got into this, what I ought to do is, to the best of my ability, and this is where a face-to-face class would be really helpful, having students like Erica in the class that know art a little bit better than I do. They could help make sure that we all understood these criteria, but I wanted to the best of my ability, to try to give you a little bit of understanding or maybe review some of these concepts you haven't heard since middle school or high school. And so the first terms that we come into contact with on the rubrics are foreground, middle ground, and background. And the way that I understand it is these are terms that are able to be applied to the way that we use space in creating artwork. And so if you look at this picture over here, you see the foreground is all of the stuff that appears close to the viewer or close to the audience. Middle ground would be that sort of mountain range over here, the valleys and so on, and the background would be further away. So if we thought we might divide the picture into 3 quadrants, the background would be the top, middle ground would be the middle, and the foreground would be closest to us. When we talk about atmospheric perspective or aerial perspective, it's the effect you get when faraway objects begin to take on colors of atmospheric haze. So distant objects, their colors begin to blend with and take on some of the atmosphere's colors. They lose their original color saturation and take on the atmosphere. So if you look at this picture, we've got the foreground here, middle ground, and background, and you see the further away we go, we lose some of the colors to atmospheric haze. You can kind of see that here as we go further into the background and we see these buildings begin to kind of blur in with the surrounding colors. And then here is just a little bit more detailed example of how the colors might change. Again, you don't need to be an expert on the atmospheric perspective, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of detail moving forward. And then in terms of overlapping and size variation, I really had to kind of stretch to come up with what this might mean because these rubrics are not overly specific. But my best guess is that when we're having or requiring items to overlap, it would be an example here of this sort of mountain cliff kind of overlapping this one here, or you see the bridge which is sort of overlapping this tree, or the rocks overlapping the tree. And then size variation would show us, something would appear to be larger if it were closer to us and smaller the further back it gets. If you can imagine, those are trees back there. So that being said, let's go ahead and let's return to this rubric and reflection worksheet. And we're going to begin, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you 3 samples of artwork, and I'm going to ask you to use one of these rubrics to sort of assess each one of those, and then reflect at the end of this on which rubric format you feel was like the most beneficial as we went through this. So we'll begin with the holistic, our second picture will be the analytic, and then our third will be the single point. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to allow you to pause this video if you need to in order to view this student example and complete the rubric that is attached. One question that I think would come up were we in a face-to-face environment would be, what level of art are we assessing here? And my best estimation would be upper elementary, lower middle school. So that being said, go ahead and assess this first piece of artwork using the holistic rubric. One thing that I encourage you to note as you're doing so is that there is no place on the rubric that actually speaks to artistic ability or necessarily clarity in design. This is more focused on the standards of foreground, middle ground, background, atmospheric perspective, and overlapping size variation. In some ways, that creates a challenge, especially dealing with this first artwork here. All right, I'm assuming you've paused the video if you needed to fill out the holistic rubric. At this time, I would typically ask you to share your thoughts with each other and with the group, but we're going to need to just move ahead here today. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is to move down to the analytic rubric on your rubric and reflection worksheet. And I'm going to ask you to use that to assess this second piece of artwork. Again, assuming this is an upper elementary, lower middle school level art class. Go ahead and pause the video, and we'll move forward here whenever you're ready. The final rubric I ask you to use is the single point rubric, and let's go ahead and use that. And this might require you to type in some comments to provide feedback about areas in need of improvement or areas that are exceptional. Let's go ahead and assess this final drawing here. Now, as we move into the reflection phase of this, what I'm asking you to do is to just think about the way that you used each of these rubrics, recognizing that the language is not perfect. What I want you to think about is actually using the holistic rubric, actually using and engaging with an analytic rubric, and actually using and engaging a single point rubric. And I want you to consider which rubric you preferred using to assess these landscapes and why. And if there are any other comments or reflections or concerns or thoughts that you have, please also type those in the box so that I might be able to address those as we move forward with this. I'm going to go ahead and leave you at this point, and just encourage you to finish up with this and then also go ahead and upload it to my USF. I would also encourage you to view the video for Enneagram number 1 in order that you might be able to stay on pace with us as we move forward here. All right, I'll talk to you again soon.